Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Well, this is the new moon day, November the 15th, and we had been expecting Lumpus Somato to be arriving in about a week's time. Should have been Saturday morning, the 21st, but today plans changed. I'm pretty sure most people will have heard the news of this. While we were gathering for our Patimokkha time this morning here in England, then Lumpus Somato was receiving word in Thailand that the king, Rama X, had offered him the title of Chakun Pram, which is there's a system of ranks that are given in the Thai ecclesiastical system, and so that this is of the 5 levels of Chakun. This is level number 5, so it's the top level of Chakun title, and so this is an extraordinary honor and completely unprecedented, and not expected by Lumpus Somato at all. And so that this sort of popped into his awareness, was announced publicly this morning, and so that meant he needs to revise his travel plans. He'll need to take part in a ceremony to receive that title. It's probably sometime within the next 3 weeks, but a date hasn't been set yet. But it's an extraordinary gesture of respect, an honor for him as an individual and for our community as a whole. Also, along with him being granted that title, and Ajahn Amaro, who's the abbot of Ratnawan Monastery, has been given the Chakun Raja title as well, so that both of them are being honored, and their practice, their life in the Sangha, and their work for the Sasana, for supporting the religion in Thailand and around the world, is being honored and respected in this way. So I spoke to Lumpur this morning, and he said he was still in shock. He'd only heard about 45 minutes before I was talking with him, and he said he was still processing the information, hadn't quite got his mind around it, but it's a very great honor and something quite extraordinary. So that along with receiving the title from the king, then he'll also go up to Wat Bapong, to the main monastery, to pay his respects at the Chaitya there, the stupa, to the relics of Lumpur Cha and to the Sangha there, and also to be probably staying at Wat Ban Nanachat and giving the opportunity for the villagers of Bungwai and the community of the International Forest Monastery and the supporters to pay their respects and to express their mudita, their rejoicing at that particular honor. Well, of course, in terms of our lives as samanas, as monastics, then these kind of titles are worldly issues. They are not really related to the aspects of our inner practice, our inner training, but they're a way that one's life, one's work as a monastic is honored by the society. So in the forest tradition, there are some of the elders, some practitioners who would really criticize or avoid those kind of honors, or look down upon them and say these are just worldly considerations and should be sort of dismissed, or should not be part of our lives at all. But it's notable that Ajahn Chah, who, as we know, was a very, very strict and very orthodox forest monk, and very, say, assiduous, very thorough, very careful and thoughtful in his training and his practice, in the example that he gave. He made a point when he was offered the title of Chaukun by King Rama IX, then he accepted it and went to the palace and received that as an honor from King Rama IX. And he saw that it's a skillful means to say, accepting that kind of a recognition. It's not for you as an individual. It's not just sort of something that is a gesture of praise for your own life, but he saw it's also a gesture of respecting and honoring the practice and the style of life and the Dhamma teachings that come forth from that. And that kind of honor, that sort of worldly recognition, it's a skillful means. People look up to that. So similarly, many of the forest ajahns, they wouldn't engage in blessing ceremonies or even perform funerals. But again, Ajahn Chah would allow that, and would encourage us to learn the Paritta chanting, the funeral chanting, so that as Sangha members we could perform those ceremonies. Again, not to support people's superstitions or just empty customs and rituals, but rather he saw that these are skillful means, or ways that the monastic order can be, say, a skillful influence, opportunities to, say, be present in and invited into the lives of the lay community to offer Dhamma teachings, and to help to inspire, encourage, and say, be an embodiment of a standard of living, a standard of ethical precision, and a kind of beautiful, say, model for people in their lives, to give people an opportunity to respect the qualities of virtue, the qualities of meditative training, concentration, and the qualities of wisdom. So that's how I see these things. And when I've been granted these same kind of titles of a lower order than Lumpus Somato has just been given, but I see that it's a skillful means. It's a way of honoring our community, our lives, and the practice that we endeavor to follow. So that it's in that spirit that I feel it's something that's very very suitable and appropriate, and can be seen as something that is skillful, useful, and beneficial in the world. So the prospect of Lumpus Somato coming to live here, he's still planning to come. Hopefully he'll get here within a month's time. Fingers crossed. Will be kept posted by Ajahn Asoko, his faithful and diligent attendant, secretary, organizer, and so that when a flight is a new flight is arranged for them, then we'll hear about it. So hopefully it'll be within the next 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks, that they're able to get here. But it has been, bringing to mind Lumpus Somato's life, his teaching, and the influence that he's had, and also the prospect of being able to help support him, look after him, and have him here in these kind of latter years of his life. Now 86 years old, and less mobile, less physical resources. He's still astonishingly clear and generous in his teachings, and so it's a beautiful opportunity for us not to just be able to support him, but also for him to be able to support us and to provide teachings and guidance and direction for us as a monastic community. It's also made me reflect upon his influence in my life, and how I first met him, and made contact with him. I was at Wat Nanachat. I arrived in Wat Nanachat after he had already left. He departed from Thailand in May of '77 and was already living in London. I actually lived in London about a mile away from the Hampstead Vihara and had no idea that the Sangha was there. Might even have crossed paths on Primrose Hill or down the street in that part of London without knowing it. But so when I was at Wat Nanachat as an anagarika, as a novice, and as a bhikkhu, then of course Ajahn Sumedho's sort of resonances were there. His influence, he'd established the place, and people had a great deal of respect for him. So his reputation was very much alive in the minds and in the example that he'd given. But physically, he was over here in England. So it wasn't until after my first reigns as a bhikkhu that I finally had the chance to actually meet him. And so his reputation was sort of huge. And it was a very, very serious, very austere, very demanding teacher, and held a very, very high standard for his Sangha. And so there was I confess, there was a bit of a daunting feeling. And I'd heard these stories about these 10-hour sittings they'd have at Hampstead when Ajahn Sumedho felt there was a need for inspiration. They'd sit for 5 hours, have a 5-minute break, and then sit for another 5 hours to kind of just invigorate the community and provide a stronger focus for practice. Or in the wintertime when people were huddling and sort of say sheltering under blankets and trying to keep warm in the drafty vihara, he would get everyone up at 3 o'clock in the morning for cold showers to begin the day with an invigorating blast. So that gave me a certain message. 10-hour sittings and cold showers at 3 in the morning. This Ajahn is really serious. So I didn't know quite what I would meet when I finally encountered him, and I came back to England. My father had a heart attack in October of 1979, and I came scurrying back from northeast Thailand. I'd been spending the rains retreat in a little branch up in Royet province, and I left there and came back to England as quickly as I could. And then after I'd arrived back with my family, then I took the opportunity to come down to Chithurst. Chithurst Monastery had only been open for about 3 or 4 months. The community had moved there in June of 1979, and this was October 79 that I went to visit. And so my first encounter with Lumpus Somato was upstairs at Chithurst House, and far from being sort of intimidated by this kind of very sort of ferocious and demanding authoritarian teacher that something in me had been expecting, there was this extraordinary warmth and friendliness, and there was this say profound quality of welcoming and ease, and it was a very, very lovely and encouraging encounter. And I can't remember what we talked about on that first meeting, apart from that sense of warmth and friendliness, and how I was completely unintimidated by him, despite having been intimidated by his reputation. The presence that I felt being close to him was very, very warm and friendly and encouraging. And I asked for, what I do remember in terms of advice, I asked him, do you have any guidance, any advice for me in terms of living with my family? My father had a heart attack, so he was in hospital in Ashford in Kent, and then as soon as he was off the critical list, then my mother collapsed, and she was in Pembury Hospital near Tunbridge Wells. So that I had 2 parents in 2 different hospitals at the same time, and which was quite a challenge to deal with. And so I asked him, so did he have any advice in terms of working with the situation that I was faced with? And he just said, "Don't be difficult." Was his one piece of advice. Don't make yourself difficult to look after. And I know that was so practical, so straightforward. It was demanding in its own way, but it was very helpful and very very simple, very practical, very straightforward guidance. Don't be difficult, just be adaptable. And I felt that that sense of say warmth and friendliness, and also the quality of clear practical guidance is very much characterizes our inheritance from Lumpus Somato, and both then practicing living with him for many years. So from that time, after the various crises with my family had sorted themselves out, my mother and father both got out of hospital, and life in the family had restored itself, and I came to live at Chithurst kind of about now, from sort of late November of 1979, and then joined the community there and lived with them from that time on. So after that, then I spent about 13 years or so being close to Lumpus Somato and his guidance and his teachings. And so and very similar to being around Lumpur Cha, I felt that there was this extraordinary blend of both rigorousness, the sense of Lumpur Somato being a very orthodox and strict forest monk, and very faithful to the traditions of Theravada Buddhism and the teaching and the practice. That internally he was extraordinarily broad and accommodating, extraordinarily wide in his appreciation of people's characters, in terms of handling different situations, also in terms of appreciating and respecting different spiritual teachings. His range of interests and knowledge was amazing, very impressive, and very very similar to Lumpur Cha. He was very kind of faithful and orthodox in terms of the practice and the kind of style of life, but internally there was an extraordinary flexibility and breadth and a kind of multifaceted quality that similarly Lumpur Cha was very at ease being with sort of Christian missionaries or meeting people who were students of Zen Buddhism and such like. He was totally at ease and comfortable with all these different spiritual expressions. And so Lumpus Somato similarly was very impressive in his range of interests and his knowledge and what influenced his own practice and teaching, so that he was along with happily quoting Lumpur Cha or Lumpur Man, the forest Ajahns as teachers, he would be quoting Victorian poets like W.B. Yeats or Tennyson. Like this kind of season, he would start quoting Alfred Lord Tennyson. A spirit haunts the closing months of the year, here amidst these the yellowing bowers of the English countryside and the falling leaves of the English autumn. And so I learned a lot of poetry, English poetry from Lumpus Somato. Be quoting Swinburne and Keats and W.B. Yeats, Tennyson, and so forth. Also, I was impressed with how good he was at crochet. You think of this sort of very austere and skilled forest Ajahn, but amazingly gifted with a crochet hook, doing crochet and macrame, and also how he would was so sort of thoughtful and generous, and would be making things for junior Sangha members. I remember he made this amazing, very complex bowl cover for one of I think it was Venerable Tanutamo, when he was coming up for his bhikkhu ordination. Lumpur crocheted him this really beautiful bowl cover with Chithurst kind of crocheted in large letters around the outside. I think it had Chithurst on one side and Citta Viveka on the other side. And it took the time and trouble and effort to make a bowl cover for a junior bhikkhu, just someone going forth as a bhikkhu, as a gesture of support and friendliness and encouragement. So it was so very touching and powerful to me how sort of how multifaceted, how many areas Lumpur Somato was really accomplished, and also how he could apply the teaching and practice to be, say, available to people, to be supportive of different people, and to speak in ways that were appropriate to different situations. And also, like Lumpur Cha, he could be very surprising, and you couldn't predict exactly how he'd respond to different situations, and that was very, very impressive to me. And I remember one time where we had it was after a Patimokkha, one of the junior monks was really kind of fired up and very indignant about something, and was expressing himself very, very strongly. And to those of us gathered around, for myself, I certainly had a great deal of kind of inner tension, like ooh, and not sure how Lumpur was going to respond to this, very sort of loud and ardent expression of this monk's feelings. And it was really striking to me how when that monk had finished saying what he wanted to say, Lumpur spoke from this extraordinarily sort of gentle and friendly place, saying, I think you need to relax a little bit, not in a kind of condescending, nasty way, not sort of patronizing, you need to calm down, but rather it was an extraordinary place of caring and gentleness, and it was not what I was expecting at all, and not say something that you would have. So I wouldn't have read the situation like that. But it was really directly from his heart and from his own sort of caring nature, and just moved by that, the needs of that particular moment. And it was extraordinarily helpful advice as well. It was respecting what that young monk had been feeling and saying and talking about. It didn't dismiss that or reject that. It respected it, but it was not intimidated or say defined by that. And I'd seen Lumpur Cha in similar ways, just working with different situations in ways that you could never guess or predict. And so that sense of receptivity and adaptability, flexibility in his teaching and practice has always been extremely, inspiring and beautiful to me over the years. Also, in terms of the kind of teachings that Lumpur gave right from the very beginning. I think I couldn't speak Thai. I couldn't really understand Lumpur Cha's teachings very directly. I very much depended on translation and interpretation. But I feel that very much in the same spirit, Lumpur Somato would always teach, informed by Theravada Buddhism and scripture, but very, very much from his own experience and what really worked for him. And so what was conveyed was something that he'd applied and had used and had seen as valuable, and it didn't really mind that much of how that might align itself with any kind of classical Theravada expression, but rather informed by what he'd learned from the other ajahns, informed by what he'd practiced himself, and just speaking from that. So I remember that one of the very first community retreats we had, I think it was we had the winter retreat was only a couple of weeks long in those days. In early 1980 it would have been, and when he was giving guidance in meditation, then he started talking about listening to the nada sound, the inner sound. He didn't even have the name nada for it at that point, just called it the sound of silence, because he had, at that point, he'd never really read anything about it or heard anyone else talk about it, so he just called it the sound of silence. But because he had applied that, he'd experimented with it, he found it beneficial, so he started talking about that and teaching that as a meditation object. And similarly, the same retreat, I think it was, again, it's all so long ago, it's hard to sort of piece the dates together. It was either in the winter of 1980 or the following year, 81. I think it was 1980, because it was in the what's now the reception room at Chithurst. That was our shrine room at the time, and also using the method of inquiry into the question, "Who am I?" And that was a practice that he'd learned from the teachings of Master Shu Yun in the Charles Luke Chan and Zen teaching, the series of books by Charles Luke, and the Dhamma talks of Master Shu Yun that were recounted in those books of Charles Luke, and that Lumpus Somato had used as his meditation guidance when he was a layman in Borneo, and then in his early years in Thailand. So these were teachings that were sort of not really classical Theravada teachings, or even particularly anything he would have heard from other forest ajahns, but he'd applied them himself. He'd used them himself, found them to be beneficial. So he shared those, and I think because of his own experience with it, his own ability to explain and to guide and to lead us through those practices, many of us found that extraordinarily helpful, beneficial, and I did, certainly myself. Had a very big impact on me, and so that was one particular approach to practice that say coming directly from his own insight, from his own understanding that he shared, and how that, and then being able to explain how that works, and leading us through that to come to that quality of inner quietness, and that, say, awakened, aware quality of the heart that is to be discovered when the mind sees through the habits of conceit and self-view, when Sakkaya Ditthi is let go of, when using a question like "Who am I?" or "What am I?" to challenge the habits of self-creation, self-view. When that falls away, what remains? And that using that quality of inner listening, just letting the mind be awake, be aware, just listening to the sound of silence, knowing, and in that moment, the habits of seeing things in terms of I and me and mine falling away. And so right there, it was amazingly helpful and a direct practical teaching for those of us to be able to touch that quality of realization, to know that heart which is awake, aware, spacious, bright, and free of self, even if for just brief moments. So right from those early years, I felt extraordinarily grateful, not just to be inspired by Lumpus Somato as a teacher and someone you can listen to and delight in the words, but also how, when applying those words and the teaching and the practice, it really made a difference in your own mind, in your own heart, and you could really test and taste the results of the teaching, and know that the effectiveness of that practice. And so it was one of those, for myself, a really very powerful source of faith and say commitment to following his guidance, following his advice, and to really being ready to attend to his teachings, and a great confidence in his role as a teacher, as a guide, a great Kalyanamitta, a great spiritual friend. Well, there are many other aspects of the teaching that were also kind of unique to his own expression that many of us are familiar with. Also in that early era, he realized when he tried to teach loving kindness meditation in the sort of classical form spreading benevolence through various classes of beings all around the world, that a lot of people found that was obstructive, or they couldn't really relate to it. So even in those early years, he was using the terminology of not dwelling in aversion as a way of expressing loving kindness, because he saw that if you try to like everything, if you think that loving is the same as liking, then you're trying to just sugar everything over, and he would use this kind of analogy of trying to think pink and say this just doesn't work. It's just nauseating and irritating. So that approaching loving kindness through that principle of not dwelling in aversion, that sense of dividing out liking from loving, was extraordinarily helpful, beneficial as a teaching, as an example. Also reflecting on Amaravati and the early years here, and I was thinking back to how when Lumpur, again as an example of his sort of expansive thinking and being ready to just be guided by intuition rather than just sort of following a very sort of fixed orthodox pattern. Well, firstly, just being ready to move out of London and to go to West Sussex, where he knew precisely 0 Buddhists in the county of West Sussex. But yeah, being ready to move out of London on faith and to set up the monastery there, and seeing how well that worked. And within 5 years of Chithurst being opened, then to launch the project to have Amaravati, it was again an extraordinary gesture. And but yet it was sort of coming from his own intuition, his recognition of how the situation demanded a broader thinking and a bit of a spirit of adventure. As they say, fortune favours the bold, is a British expression. Fortune favours the bold. So he was bold in, even before Chithurst was really fixed up and the place really fully livable. He was already thinking in terms of expanding the range of activity. Also, he'd met Master Xuanhua in the States and had been inspired by his example of setting up the city of 10,000 Buddhas in this former psychiatric hospital and prison for the criminally insane in Northern California, taken that over and established a very large community, monastic community and lay community and schools there. And so inspired a bit by Master Hua's example, and also recognizing that we needed a place to run our own retreats and a bigger place particularly for the nuns community, then he launched Amaravati. That's how most people are probably very well aware. That was one of the sort of guiding principles, or the forces behind the establishment of this place. And so one of the memories that came to mind was how, and again, the kind of the sort of experimental spirit or adventurous spirit that Lumpus Somato has always had, was that in those early years of Amaravati, I came here about a year after it had opened. The group first arrived in August of '84. I arrived in July of 1985. So in the winter retreat of 1986, January and February of 1986, then Lumpur, so encouraged, I think, by the example of Master Hua at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, and some of us who were sort of very zealous, who were around at that time, we established a routine for the winter retreat, which was morning bell goes at 3 o'clock, and group practice through the day till 11 at night. And that was a very rigorous and demanding routine of formal practice. And there was a kind of take no prisoners spirit. It was just, and he was giving very sort of encouraging and inspiring, energizing talks. But it was a very, very demanding routine. Also, it was extremely cold winter, and the food supplies were pretty minimal, so that there was a lot of vitamin deficiency and protein deficiency in the community. it was the kind of era where when we went to give blood, most of us were turned away because our iron count was too low, and we were not able to donate blood because we were too sort of anemic to qualify as blood donors. But anyway, not to sort of glamorize the difficulties of that era, but also it was such a cold winter, and also he was encouraging vigor to a great extent. That there were a few monks who literally broke the ice on the pond. The abbot's kuti wasn't there, so it was just the old school swimming pool was still sitting there in that garden area. So a few of the monks and novices would literally break the ice on the pool in the morning and jump in at 3 o'clock. I did it once. You're certainly awake. You're definitely awake, but you're extremely cold and impacted by the kind of the shock to the system of jumping into icy water. But you're definitely not sleepy in the morning sitting after that. But anyway, what was the reason why I mention it now was that, and even though that was an inspiring or sort of invigorating time for some of us, it was really impressive how at the end of that retreat time, Luang Por made the comment that, it was kind of sort of zealous and there was an energy to it, but he said, I didn't really like the result. It didn't really have a good effect on the community. There was so many of the Sangha members who were, it was too much, it was too exhausting. We were really overstressing and stretching ourselves, and that a few people might have benefited greatly, but a lot of people it was giving the wrong message, and just that sense of more exertion and sort of piling on the austerities is intrinsically a good thing. And so when we had the next winter retreat the following year, beginning of 87, he changed the approach completely. So we had a much more average routine, gathering at 5 o'clock rather than 4 o'clock, and not staying up till 11 at night every night. But it was a more of an even routine, and rather than emphasizing this kind of sort of take no prisoners austerities, he was very consciously encouraging wise reflection, and that's where many of the teachings, recorded teachings that he gave about dependent origination was from that era, so 87, 88, 89, those years. So he was, rather than encouraging just a sort of muscular attack on the defilements, maybe that's one way of talking about it, rather to take the approach of a more moderate or even level of engagement, and strongly encouraging the quality of wise reflection, investigation. And then again, he was sort of watching what the results are. How do people relate to that? How does that work? What's the result of that? And then being aware that this works for a lot of people. People can use their abilities to explore, to investigate, to think, and to understand, and to apply the practice to these principles of dependent origination. And for a lot of us, that had been a bit of a mysterious teaching, and something that we maybe related to as a sort of an intellectual form that you find in some of the scriptures. But over those years, and Luang Por literally spending like 2 or 3 weeks just on one link of the dependent origination chain, like avijja paccaya sankhara or tanha upadana bhava. He would spend days and days, weeks and weeks, just on one little area, going over it until you could really understand it and investigate it and explore it in the practice. And then trying that out, testing that out, seeing how people responded, and seeing, that has a good effect. So I've again reflecting on Luang Por's style, that sense of being ready to experiment, say following that sort of ultra austere, energetic example, and saying, yeah, okay, it was worth trying out, but yeah, the result of it wasn't good, and not just sticking to it because of an idea or an ideal, but saying, no, it's not practical. It doesn't really work well for this group of people at this time, this place. Let's do something else, and then taking a different approach and being guided by the results of that. So over the years, I felt extraordinarily grateful for Lumpur's approach in that way, and then the sense of compatibility of his teaching particularly with the Western mindset. I know he's very greatly appreciated for his teachings in Thailand, in Asia, and Malaysian community, and so forth. There's a very significant teacher in those environments as well. But certainly I think for the Western mindset, and his approach has been so helpful, so applicable to those of us who've grown up in the Western environment, Western education system, and it's been a set of teachings and practices, an example that's been extraordinarily appropriate and fitting for us. And one of the reasons why that we're such a sort of large group of us who are here, and the many dozens, the people who've gone forth, hundreds of people who've gone forth, taken up the 8 precepts, 10 precepts, and the Bhikkhu Siladhara life under his guidance. Maybe just also to mention another couple of aspects of his teaching that I found I'm referring to a lot, and I was giving a set of talks yesterday for a group based in Chicago, the Theosophical Society of America. The ex-Ajahn Jagaro is the John Chianchiosi, who was one of the senior monks at Wat Nanachat when I first went there. He disrobed a number of years ago, and he is the event organizer for the Theosophical Society in the US. So he'd asked me to do a session of teachings for them, which was yesterday evening. And so I found myself quoting a number of Lumpus Somato's teachings, as I often do, and the particular area that I found extraordinarily helpful, and I think for many people over the years, is his understanding of emotion and the development of the practice around working with emotional states. So the kind of thing that he would often encounter, and still you find a lot today, is people reading Buddhist books or hearing Buddhist teachings, or having explained to them that if you're really practicing Buddhism properly, you won't have any emotions, or you won't experience any kind of distressing mind states, and that which he would find sort of bizarre or just unrealistic, impractical. That or that the aim, you're not trying to just emotionally flatten yourself and to become kind of numb or just unresponsive. But with all due respect, many Buddhist teachings have put things across in that way, or that the scriptures have been read in that way, and that it's, say, presented as the enlightened mind is one that has sort of almost no emotional tone to it. It's a sort of a great flatness that's there. And over the years, Lumpus Somato's teachings about emotion, again back in that period of the late 80s, early 90s, when I was living here with him, that would be such a common theme in his teaching, and how that it's not so much about not having any emotions, or that's certainly not the aim of Buddhist practice, but rather to find the middle way. So you're not trying to suppress emotion, or not wallowing in it or identifying with it, but fully understanding it, and so that style of practice where there are emotions of fear or jealousy or anger or lust or resentment or regret, grief, he would talk at great length and in great detail about how in terms of practicing Dhamma, there's no need to be afraid or upset or embarrassed about having those emotions. So often, even today, people will say, I'm feeling a lot of grief. My partner died, or my father died, my mother died. I shouldn't be feeling. If I was a good Buddhist, if I was practicing well, I wouldn't have all this grief. I wouldn't be so upset. I wouldn't be so tearful. And it was so helpful for Lumpur would talk directly about that and say that's really a wrong understanding. It's not about not feeling grief or sadness or feeling those feelings of jealousy. If the cause for those emotions is there, that they'll arise, but it all hinges around the attitude of the heart towards those. And so particularly that sense of being open to the emotions that we feel, but also developing mindfulness around emotion, so that the mind can truly feel and know the emotional states that appear, but not be intimidated by them. So there can be a wave of anger or resentment. This is an angry feeling, but there's the full mindfulness of it is it's fully there, but it's not being picked up or identified with. It's seen from a Dhamma-centered perspective, a nature-centered perspective, rather than my anger problem or my fear problem, my jealousy problem or my lust problem or my grief, my resentment. And in his way of phrasing it, he would talk about changing the paradigm, making a paradigm shift from me and my problems to here is the Buddha mind seeing the Dhamma. Here's the Buddha seeing the Dhamma, the awake mind seeing the way things are. And again, that was such a helpful way of relating to emotional states and to find a really integrated way of handling the feelings of attraction, aversion, fear, and resentment, regret, and hope, and so forth. The different tones and qualities of emotion as they flow and arise and pass in our minds. And so there was that way of, say, approaching it on the mental level in terms of the view, say, this is the feeling of anger. Anger is a part of nature. I didn't invent anger. Anger existed in the universe before I was born, but this is a human mind, a human body is capable of experiencing anger. It's capable of experiencing lust or fear or ownership, or feeling regret or sadness. It's part of the system. And so that recognizing this is an arisen state, here it is, it feels this way, and to see here is the awake, aware mind, the Buddha mind, knowing the Dhamma, rather than me and my problem, me and my fear problem, my anger problem, my jealousy problem. And when that's applied, it genuinely changes the landscape, the inner landscape where you relate to your own mind, but also how we relate to each other as human beings and in a community. Similarly, there's a physical aspect to it as well, along with the mental or the aspect of view. Then one of the areas he would also emphasize was how every emotion has a physical counterpart. There's a somatic quality. So when you're feeling jealousy, or when you're feeling fear or anger or lust, there's a physical texture, a physical tone. There's sensations in the body that go along with that emotion, and he would teach these various different practices to bring attention to the physical sensations that go along with any kind of emotional state. And similarly, by consciously feeling those sensations, knowing them, accepting them, to not dwell in aversion to them, to really accept them exactly as they are, has also helped to give us the skills whereby those emotions could be understood as part of a natural order, just like the changing season, the autumn, say the changing of the leaves, the falling of the leaves in this autumn period. Yeah, and it's part of the season. It's this way. There's a coolness, there's a greyness, a dankness to the November weather, the falling leaves, the yellowing bowers that he would quote. The spirit haunts the year's last hours here amid these yellowing bowers. There's a tone there, there's a quality, so that then when we feel fear, where is it in the body? When we feel anger, where is it in the body? What's its temperature, its vibration, its texture? Where is it? How do you feel it? And everyone would say everyone of us experiences those things in different ways. But if we bring attention to that and develop that quality of acceptance, of knowing, receiving those sensations, then there's a way that those emotions, the patterns of emotion, are really known and understood, and don't bring any kind of burden or stress. The mind does not create dukkha out of any of those emotional states. There's not a grasping hold of them, there's not a pushing away, there's not an identification with them. They're just like the flowing of the weather. It's the autumn season, it's like this. There's this kind of somber quality, this cooling, this fading tone that comes with the autumn season, the onset of winter. It's like this. And the mind doesn't give any wrongness to it, or doesn't see it as anything bad or unwanted, or that it shouldn't be this way. Another of the aspects, maybe one of the last things to mention on this score is how, again, displaying his own kind of creativity, or seeing how things work, like with loving kindness, talking about loving kindness as not dwelling in aversion. He realized when he used the words mindfulness and clear comprehension to translate sati sampajanya, again with that same kind of practicality and looking at his own practice, his own mind, he thought, well, that's not really accurate, because clear comprehension, it gives a sense of like an intellectual understanding, but you can be fully mindful. You can have sampajanya of something that you don't comprehend at all. You can fully know that this is mysterious. You have no idea what's going on, but you're fully aware that you have no idea what's going on. Like you can be in the dark. This is dark. I can't see. I don't know what's happening here, but you can have a full attunement to that which is mysterious or not comprehended. You don't have an idea or a clear picture, but you know that you don't know. So in that same period, he started using this phrase, intuitive awareness, as a translation for sati sampajanya. Rather than mindfulness and clear comprehension, he coined this phrase, intuitive awareness, to better convey that spirit of awareness. Yeah, the mind is awake and is aware, but using the word intuitive to represent that in a way the quality of not knowing, and to say inclining away from that idea of a conceptual understanding. And again, that was a very, very helpful distinction to make. And he would explain why. He was say, I'm not using this word comprehension because you can be aware of that which is not comprehensible, that which is not conceptually understood or figured out, but we can be aware of it. And that kind of creativity and practicality is another one of these aspects of Lumpur's teachings that, again, when he'd say that, you'd think, oh yeah, of course. Over the years, again, over the last few days, I've been reflecting a lot on his teachings and that what we've inherited from him. And how often when he would come up with something like that, you go, oh yeah, of course, right. Why didn't I see that? So yeah, I feel so grateful, so enormously benefited by that sort of flexibility of his thinking and his ability to put into words, to articulate these principles, and then also giving guidance as to how to apply them, so that I can't personally, I can't imagine what my spiritual life would have been like without having his influence, his guidance, his presence as a great Kalyanamitta, and an explainer, and a mentor for my own spiritual practice. So I feel enormously grateful for everything that I've sort of received from his guidance, and I find myself quoting him in almost every single Dhamma talk I give, not just like this evening, where I'm specifically focusing upon him as a person, as a teacher, as a guide, but in almost every single Dhamma teaching that I've offered over the years, I'm readily quoting him and using his examples, his teachings, his practices. So it's really is genuinely unimaginable how things might have taken shape without his influence in my life. So I'm extraordinarily, heartfully grateful to have received so much from his own understanding, his own practice, his own guidance, and I really hope that that's something that's say filtering down into the lives of everybody here. Many of you have never even met him, or if you maybe met him when he came to visit for a few days or a few weeks over the last number of years, but have not had the chance to be close to him, or to listen to his teachings, or to say be guided by his examples. So I'm really grateful to the extent that it'll be possible if he manages to move here, and hopefully that'll work out within the next few weeks, and that also over the coming months, that there'll be the opportunities for people to draw close to him, to hear his teachings, and to receive his guidance. I think it's a wonderful blessing, a wonderful opportunity, and I feel extremely grateful that things have come about in this way, and I'm very very happy that we're able to provide a place that we built, the Aroga Kuti, as a suitable living spot for him. So I hope that does indeed serve its purpose as a supportive living space for him, and that he will be able to spend a long time here, and to be an ongoing source of blessings and guidance for our community. So I offer these thoughts for consideration this evening.